This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1001 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by DraftKings. Thanks for tuning in. Football season's right around the corner, and there's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. As you know, I'm drafting over there and I'm documenting things with becoming a Best Ball bro. So you can use the information from that show to help you out as well. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's two chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Now let's get to these mailbag questions. The first question is from Twitter. It's from the first man _Adam. It says, do you use sportsbooks when researching player stats and projections, specifically for over-under lines or projections? No, I don't. There was a great comment about this exact topic this week by Established the Run's Adam Levitan, and he's exactly right. And I'm just going to read it because he articulated it really well. It was a quote tweet about Rashee Rice and Jawan Jennings' Proplines. And this was before all the news broke with Rashee Rice. But he said, seen a bunch of these posts. Think people should be very careful about using prop lines for fantasy. Number one, season-long prop lines aren't that efficient. Limits and liquidity are very low. Number two, prop outcomes are binary. We don't get paid more if Rashee Rice goes for 1,800 yards. Number three, when you don't get paid on ceiling outcomes, it's harder to accept the floor outcomes. For Rice, there's tail risk on the knee and suspension stuff. Number four, good fantasy rankings consider the full distribution of outcomes. Good prop lines are simply medians. Maybe Jennings goes for 800 yards 50% of the time and 1,800 yards 1% of the time, whereas Rice hits 1,800 yards 20% of the time. That's a massive difference. Number five, books should be and are daring bettors to bet overs on season-long props. Due to injury and chaos, outcomes skew hard to left tail. Rookies, guys off injury like Rashee Rice, typically have far wider range of outcomes. So essentially, these lines are giving us some median outcome when in fantasy football, we're often not concerned with that median outcome. Now, I removed part of this question that was from Patreon because it names someone else in the fantasy industry, and I'm not here to disagree with someone else's take who can't defend it. But the player in question was Jared Goff, and the question alluded to Goff having really good season-long prop lines compared to other quarterbacks, and then how that made him undervalued in fantasy. But this is exactly what I've been saying about Goff and why you can fall into this trap of thinking that he's a value. In fantasy football, we shouldn't be concerned about median outcomes at quarterback. Quarterback is the most replaceable position in the game. Now, it's hard to match the elite guys at the position, but you can get streamers each and every week and put together a low-end QB1 performance by points per game. And I know this factually because I've been doing that and tracking the results on my other podcast, Living the Stream. I've been doing that for the last 10 years. Low-end QB1 production is replaceable in 99% of leagues out there, maybe 98%, which means I don't care that Jared Goff might finish as the QB10 after being drafted as the QB11. He's literally been a top 6 quarterback in his career 0 times. He's never scored 20 points per game. He's never been a serious difference-making player. And this is not the season where I want to bet on that changing. He's coming off a high touchdown rate season, so his cost is higher. He lost his offensive coordinator. The Lions, they have more question marks on the offensive line than they did before. As a fantasy analyst, my job is to not tell you who's going to simply meet expectation, because that doesn't win fantasy leagues. Like a lot of my fades this year, a lot of the players I'm not aggressively drafting, they're guys who I fully understand can meet their ADP expectation, like Brian Robinson and Jared Goff. But I don't think, given Robinson's receiving upside, that he's going to be someone that I'm upset about passing on. Same with Jared Goff and what he can do because he doesn't run the ball. Now, I could be wrong. Any of my predictions could be wrong, but that's where my analysis points to. And with quarterback, it's even easier to make those adjustments and assumptions because they're arguably the most solved position in fantasy football. And we know that if we miss out on someone who ends up as the QB9, the QB10, our fantasy season is far from over. It's far from ruined. Just know that these prop lines are not the types of lines that we should be worried about in season-long fantasy football. We should be far more concerned about the ceiling outcomes for these players throughout most of our draft, not the median ones. Now, maybe you could argue that they're more important for some of the early round picks, but definitely not past that point in your draft. This next question is also from Patreon. It's from Brofilio. It says, "Hey JJ, I just re-listened to episode 787 because I wanted to revisit your take on handcuffing. Has your perspective changed at all since then? I'm curious, especially given a few backfields this year like Atlanta that would seem to raise the question again, at least for me. Would love to hear your thoughts. On a related note, I've also been wondering, is there such a thing as handcuffing wide receivers, or should there be? For example, what do you think about the idea of handcuffing Puka Nacua with Devontae Adams or Jamar Chase with T. Higgins? I think the term handcuffing just needs to be thrown out at this point. And I've said this for years. Everyone has a different definition of what it means. Like, is David Montgomery a handcuff to Jahmyr Gibbs? Is Tajay Spears a Tony Pollard handcuff? Is Jaylen Warren a handcuff to Caleb Johnson? I'd argue a strong no in all of those cases. Handcuffs to me are players who have zero value without an injury. And generally speaking, they're not the kind of end-of-bench players that I'm drafting in season long. They're the kind of players that I'm picking up as the season goes on. Because I want flexibility on my bench to start the season when there's a lot of chaos going on. When we're learning about what might happen in that given season. When you draft handcuffs, they're often one of the first players to get dropped by your team. Because you can't assume that the player you're handcuffing gets hurt in the first couple of weeks of the season. Not only that, but handcuffs are not sure things. Everyone makes these assumptions that like Will Shipley is going to be the starter in Philadelphia and see this massive workload if Saquon Barkley gets hurt. And while I'd rather take Shipley than A.J. Dillon, it's not a 100% fact that Shipley would see this massive workload. In my season-long league, I'd rather take a shot on players in more ambiguous backfields, more ambiguous situations who could overcome and be usable even without an injury. This is why we talk about contingent upside so much more than we used to. Because there are a ton of split backfields out there, and some players have standalone value even with a good starter in front of them, like David Montgomery. But then they have that contingent injury upside if their backfield teammate gets hurt. And as far as the wide receivers go, I mean, some players would get an obvious spike if their team's wide receiver one got hurt. Like Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua. Yeah, if Puka Nacua is not in the picture, Devontae Adams is a full-blown obvious wide receiver one. But you're also spending a lot of draft equity just to handcuff that player. You're putting a lot of eggs in that basket, which you can do, but you don't have to do. But like last year, we saw Devontae Smith had a target share per game rate that was almost 10 percentage points higher when he played without either A.J. Brown or Dallas Goedert. But those players, they're highly unlikely to be found in the later rounds, if that makes sense, right? We're talking about Devontae Adams and Devontae Smith. Both of those guys are really freaking good at football. But on the contingent upside front, yes, you should absolutely consider that in your evaluation of players. It's one of the reasons I think Adams is undervalued in season-long drafts. But I don't draft handcuffs. I'll add them as the season goes on. This next question is from Twitter. It's from @FootyTalk0010. It says, how are you reacting to a potential suspension of Quinshon Judkins? Do Sampson and Ford climb draft board substantially? Which of these backs reap the benefit, and even if they do, will they be worth drafting at a higher price? Well, my reaction to the Judkins situation is that it's just really unfortunate, and I hope justice is properly served. This is the worst part about my job. There's no right time to talk about this kind of thing, but I also need to react to news because it is my job. So strictly from a football perspective, let's dig into this. Remember, Quinshon Judkins does not have a contract right now. So who knows what the Browns' plans are with him? And who knows what happens with that case? What we do know is that Dylan Sampson and Jerome Ford are behind him on the depth chart, hypothetically speaking. Now, there's been some talk about Sampson being a pass catcher for Cleveland. The coaching staff has talked about that this offseason. It's a little bit hard for me to believe because he didn't do a whole lot of that in college. To me, Sampson was a little bit overvalued as a prospect, just a little bit. He wasn't terrible by any means, but he was slightly undersized and he didn't have a great pass catching profile. But he was actually pretty good between the tackles and he has burst. And he actually is a good short yardage back despite his size. So maybe I thought he was a little bit overvalued, but he's not someone that I would avoid totally. I thought Judkins was a better prospect when you layer on draft capital, but you guys know that I had questions about Quinshon Judkins too. Sampson had some interesting comps. One was Devontae Freeman, who had his high upside moments in fantasy, and he had a really close comp to Ronnie Hillman. Rest in peace, Ronnie Hillman. And that was one of my favorite comps for him. But Hillman had some moments of usability as well. I just worry about Sampson being like a huge upside piece. So where we're at, I think if Judkins is not in the picture in this hypothetical, we'd see Sampson and Ford split that backfield. Sampson would obviously have more intrigue because of the unknown, and I think he could be a 15-touch player in the league. But my fear would be negative game scripts. I think they're going to use Jerome Ford, the veteran, in those environments. And he's been a pass catcher in the past. So I think they might use Ford regardless of Judkins being in or out. And it's projected to be a bad team and a bad offense, which could lean Ford more often than we'd like. But I would still rank Sampson ahead. I just wouldn't be surprised if the result would be that Ford was the better value, if that makes sense. And this is all hypothetical right now because we have no idea what's going to happen with this Quinshon Judkins situation. This next question is from David. It says, "Hi JJ, longtime listener, tons of love for what you do." Thanks, David. Apologies if you've touched on this before, but how do you approach team building in heavy tight end premium leagues if you don't have one of Bowers, McBride, or Kittle? Especially if you're a borderline contender in a shallower league with less teams, 10 or less. You touched on the tight end dead zone in one of your recent episodes, now targeting good offenses and or teams where the tight end is the second target. Would you say this is a strategy worth leaning into in a shallower league, or is it a better idea to retool for the future? So to be clear, the tight end dead zone episode was purely about season-long leagues. It's not about dynasty leagues. And this question, the way it's worded, makes me think that you're referring to dynasty. But I do still want to talk about this idea of the tight end dead zone for really any format. Because with dynasty, you're still playing fantasy football within this singular 2025 season. So it still applies to some degree. I actually think this is a spot where you can lean into the tight end dead zone idea even more. When there's tight end premium leagues, when there's a tight end premium format. It's not to say that the standard mid-range tight end one players won't see a bit of a bump in value given they're getting an extra half point per reception. But oftentimes, it almost becomes like the running back dead zone, where teams are so excited to get this rare piece, which is a true elite tight end, and they boost up players who probably don't deserve to get boosted up, which makes the elite tight ends actually more valuable selections in the end, because the next tier of tight ends are going earlier than they should. Now, what that means for you is that you should still likely go with a go big or just wait on the tight end position strategy. And since this question, it's saying that if you don't get one of the big three tight ends in Bowers, McBride, or Kittle, there are some guys that I do like in that tight end dead zone range, like Evan Ingram, Tucker Kraft. Those are two names that come to mind. But you run the risk of those players going far earlier in your draft in a tight end premium format. And when that happens, the opportunity cost in selecting one of those players, it rises pretty dramatically. Meanwhile, while some of those later round tight ends, they're going to rise in ADP too, the rise is still going to be in a zone in your draft where there's not a significant opportunity cost. So without digging into the details of this kind of thing and just being high level with this, I wouldn't let half a point per reception totally change my approach. Like volume at the end of the day, it ties to every statistic in fantasy football. Touchdowns, receptions, yards, it's driven by volume. You're going to have outlier touchdown seasons and all that, but I just mean if a tight end's going to be good in a normal league, then he's probably going to be good in tight end premium and vice versa. Generally speaking, like if Brenton Strange is a breakout tight end, he's probably going to be a breakout tight end and tight end premium too. It doesn't change that general idea and equation. And it may make going with late round tight ends, maybe getting an extra one to cover your bases and improve your chances of hitting, but it might make those late round tight ends even more appetizing as the middle round tight ends, their prices rise, and they rise to a point in your draft where the opportunity cost is really significant. So hopefully that makes sense and can be applied to both your season long and your dynasty leagues. It's not super mathematical, and maybe I'll do a tight end premium breakdown next offseason. It's just too late for that right now. But for now, you at least have some tools to react properly to both types of formats and drafts. The last question this week is from Joey on Patreon. It says, is there a chance everyone is undervaluing Isiah Pacheco? The injury experts predicted reduced performance with return from injury. Before the injury, he was a workhorse. Are Kareem Hunt and Brashard Smith likely to cut into his workload significantly? As an average Joe, a running back in a great offense who has shown capability of a 3-down workload going in the middle rounds seems like a buy. So I think Jacob Sanderson put it best on last week's Perspectives episode. Isiah Pacheco is probably more of a classic dead zone running back, but we're not paying that price tag anymore for him. Like realistically, Pacheco isn't completely the kind of running back that we want to target out of the middle rounds. This is year 4 for him. He's not necessarily being pulled down by ADP because of uncertainty of skill set. He's never had a 10% target share per game rate in a single NFL season. He's never really been a massive plus as a receiver. But this kind of running back, given the depth of the position right now and the intelligence of the average fantasy manager, this type of back would have been more like a 5th rounder just a few years ago. But he's not now. Now, it's true that Pacheco was looking good before his injury last year. And I remember vividly Dr. Jeff Mueller coming on Late Round Perspectives and me asking him about Pacheco. It was in the middle of last season. It was around the time that people were thinking about adding Pacheco back to their roster when he was coming back from that injury. And Jeff was really adamant about the fact that he just wouldn't be the same running back when he came back from injury. And Jeff was completely right. Now, that also makes me feel a lot better about his injury being one of the main reasons for his down numbers during the second half of last year. He also was just failing the eye test. But Pacheco did have really strong target share numbers to start last year with games of an 11.5% share and then a 22.7% one. I think though, funny enough, given how he started last year, that's where my biggest hesitation is with him this year. I've talked about yards per route run being a predictor for running back target share. He's never been special within that statistic. And if Brashard Smith really does come on, I do think there's a chance that he steals some receiving work from Isiah Pacheco. And that's given Smith's a converted receiver who kind of profiles as a player who can play a role like that in the NFL. Maybe in like a Jerick McKinnon kind of way. So I'm okay with drafting Pacheco. I'm actually slightly above market. But I don't think he's totally egregiously priced. His workload to start last year just doesn't seem super sustainable in hindsight. And Kansas City should just have more pass catching weapons in general this year, even with the Rashee Rice suspension. And that can lead to a lower target share for Pacheco in that backfield. And that's my worry. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Make sure you're checking out the Late Round Draft Guide. You can find that over on lateround.com. Subscribe to the newsletter as well. It's absolutely free. Thanks for listening, everyone. Greatly appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll talk to you next week.